Vulnerability scan is one of the most important parts of a penetration test or ethical hacking. Vulnerability scanning is an inspection of the potential points of compromising on a computer or network to identify security holes. A vulnerability scan detects and classifies system weaknesses in computers, networks, and network devices and predicts the effectiveness of countermeasures. So let's think about the term vulnerability first. I want to show you two vulnerability definitions from two important documents. The first document, ISO 27005, is the name of the prime 27000 series standard covering information security risk management. The standard provides guidelines for information security risk management, ISRM, in an organization, specifically supporting the requirements of an information security management system defined by ISO 27001. So according to ISO 27005, vulnerability is a weakness of an asset or group of assets that can be exploited by one or more threats. The second document is published by NIST. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. NIST is a measurement standards laboratory and a non-regulatory agency of the United States Department of Commerce. Its mission is to promote innovation and industrial competitiveness. NIST has very good guides about cybersecurity, so if you're cybersecurity personnel, you should definitely keep your eyes on NIST. So according to NIST, vulnerability is a flaw or weakness in a system, security procedures, design, implementation, or internal controls that could be exercised, accidentally triggered, or intentionally exploited, and result in a security breach or a violation of the system's security policy. Let's see the basic vulnerability detection methods. By looking at an application's banner information, or by obtaining version information of the application, it is possible to know about potential weaknesses in that application. The weaknesses found in certain versions of the applications are detected over time, and this information is collected in vulnerability databases. By looking at these databases, you may have information about whether there is a weakness in that application. Now, protocols used by the application in communication with a client may have vulnerabilities. In this case, the application can be exploited. A weak encryption algorithm in communication is an example. The vulnerability scanners send different types of packets over the network. It examines the behavior of the service against these packets and examines whether these behaviors are similar to the behaviors of the vulnerable services. Wrong configurations may cause the vulnerabilities and weaknesses. For example, if you configure your web application's authentication mechanism to allow 3-character passwords, it can very easily be cracked by attackers. A vulnerability scanner is a software program designed to assess computers, computer systems, networks, or applications for known weaknesses. In plain words, these scanners are used to discover the weak points or poorly constructed parts. It's utilized for the identification and detection of vulnerabilities relating to misconfigured assets or flawed software that resides on a network-based asset such as firewall, a router, web server, application server, etc. There are a lot of vulnerability scanners. Some of them are listed in this slide. We have seen Nmap in previous lectures as a network scanner. And we also learned that with the help of Nmap scripting engine, NSE, it's possible to use Nmap as a simple vulnerability scanner. Nessus is one of the most popular and capable vulnerability scanners. We'll see it in detail in the next lecture. Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer provides a streamlined method to identify missing security updates and common security misconfigurations. It's only for Microsoft systems, and we have to say that it's not an overall vulnerability scanner at all. But no matter what, if you have Windows systems in your network, it would be better if you used Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer. Nexpose is a commercial tool developed by Rapid7, which are the producers of Metasploit framework. It is a vulnerability scanner which aims to support the entire vulnerability management lifecycle, including discovery, detection, verification, risk classification, impact analysis, reporting, and mitigation. It integrates with Metasploit for vulnerability exploitation. OpenVAS is an open-source vulnerability scanner that was forked from the last free version of Nessus after that tool went proprietary in 2005. Saint is a commercial vulnerability assessment tool. Like Nessus, it used to be free and open source, but is now a commercial product. Unlike Nexpose and QualisGuard, Saint runs on Linux and Mac OS X. In fact, Saint is one of the few scanner vendors that don't support or run on Windows at all. GFI LandGuard is a network security and vulnerability scanner designed to help with patch management, network and software audits, and vulnerability assessments. The price is based on the number of IP addresses you wish to scan. A free trial version up to 5 IP addresses is available. QualisGuard is a popular code-based SAS, Software as a Service, vulnerability management offering. Its web-based UI offers network discovery and mapping, asset prioritization, vulnerability assessment reporting, and remediation tracking according to business risk. Secunia PSI, Personal Software Inspector, is a free security tool designed to detect vulnerable and outdated programs and plugins that expose your PC to attacks. Attacks exploiting vulnerable programs and plugins are rarely blocked by traditional antivirus programs. Secunia PSI checks only the machine it is running on, while its commercial sibling, Secunia CSI, Corporate Software Inspector, I know what you TV fans are thinking. Anyway, that scans on multiple machines on a network. So, a vulnerability database is a platform aimed at collecting, maintaining, and disseminating information about discovered vulnerabilities targeting real computer systems. The database will customarily describe the identified vulnerability, assess the potential infliction on computer systems, and the workaround required to desist a hacker. Now, here are the most known vulnerability databases. Open-sourced Vulnerability Database, OSVBD, was an independent and open-source database. The goal of the project was to provide accurate, detailed, current, and unbiased technical information on security vulnerabilities. The project promoted greater and more open collaboration between companies and individuals. The project was started in August 2002 at the Black Hat and DEF CON conferences by several industry notables. On the 5th of April, 2016, the database was shut down, although the blog will continue. The National Vulnerability Database is the U.S. government repository of standards-based vulnerability management data represented using the Security Content Automation Protocol, SCAP. This data enables automation of vulnerability management, as well as security measurement and compliance. NVD includes databases of security checklists, security-related software flaws, misconfigurations, product names, and impact metrics. CVEdetails.com is a free CVE security vulnerability database information source. You can view CVE vulnerability details, exploits, references, Metasploit modules, a full list of vulnerable products, and CVSS score reports, and vulnerability trends over time. CVE, Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures, is the system that provides a reference method for publicly known information security vulnerabilities and exposures. So let's have a look at Nessus. Developed by Tenable Network Security, is one of the most popular and capable vulnerability scanners. Nessus Professional is a commercial product. In addition, a free Nessus Home version is also available, though it's limited and only licensed for home network use. Nessus allows scans for the following types of vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities that allow a remote hacker to control or access sensitive data on a system. Misconfiguration, for example, open mail relay, missing patches, etc. Default passwords, a few common passwords, and blank or absent passwords on some system accounts. Nessus can also call Hydra, an external tool, to launch a dictionary attack. Denials of service against the TCP/IP stack by using malformed packets, and preparation for PCI DSS audits. Now, in a typical operation, Nessus begins by doing a port scan to determine which ports are open on the target, and then tries various exploits on the open ports. The vulnerability tests, available as subscriptions, are written in NASL, Nessus Attack Scripting Language, a scripting language optimized for custom network interaction. Nessus is constantly updated, with more than 70,000 plugins. Key features include remote and local authenticated security checks, a client-server architecture with a web-based interface, and an embedded scripting language for writing your own plugins or understanding the existing ones. Optionally, the results of the scan can be reported in various formats, such as plain text, XML, HTML, and LaTeX. Now, Nessus is not embedded into Kali, so let's download it to install and use in our Kali. Open the browser and search for Nessus Home Download in Google. I think you already know that Nessus Home is the name of the free version of Nessus. So discard the ads. The first link is Tenable's Nessus homepage. We need an activation code to use Nessus Home, and we have to register for an activation code. So you'd better register with your exact names and email addresses. Since I have previous registrations, I'd like to register with a public name and mail address. Ethical Hacker is the name and surname. ethichack@yopmail.com. Click register when you're okay. Now, the next page is where you can find the download link for Nessus Home. The page says that an email containing my activation code has been sent to my email address. So let's open a new tab and look to see if we've got the activation code. I go to yopmail.com/ethichack, which is the URL address of ethichack@yopmail.com email address. And here's the email with the activation code. Now go back to the homepage of Nessus and click Download. Here's a list of the binaries of Nessus Home. Our Kali is a 64-bit Debian, so I'm going to click and download this one. And save the file. Now let's install the packet that we downloaded. I go back to the browser to see the location to where the file has been downloaded. It's downloaded in the Downloads folder. Now open a terminal screen and go to the folder using cd command. To install the packet, use dpkg Linux command with iparameter. And last, type the file name. Remember, you can use the tab key to complete the file name and hit enter. The installation is completed within a few seconds. Now let's look at the messages. It says we should start the Nessus D daemon to start Nessus Home. And then we can connect to the web interface of Nessus, which will be served at port 8834. This is the default port of Nessus Home's interface. So use the service command to start the Nessus D daemon. First, I want to look at its status. It's inactive at the moment. Type service Nessus D start to start Nessus D daemon. Now, let's look at the ports of our Kali, which happen to be in listen mode. Use the netstat command with TNLP parameters. And here it is. Port 8834 is being listened to by Nessus D. Now we can access Nessus Home's web interface. So go to the browser and type 127.0.0.1:8843 and hit enter. As you know, 127.0.0.1 stands for the local host. You can use the IP address of your Kali instead. It doesn't matter. Whoops! Nessus service is an HTTPS service. So we have to use HTTPS at the beginning of our URL. So our browser says that the connection is not secure because the local certificate of Nessus is not registered by a CA, a certificate authority. No worries, click Advanced and then Add Exception and click Confirm Security Exception. And here's the first interaction with Nessus Home's web interface. So the next step is to set up Nessus Home. First step is to create an account. Select a username for yourself and add a password. Click Continue. The next screen asks the scanner type and the activation code, which has been sent to our email address while we were downloading the Nessus Home's installation packet. Here are the scanner types. We'll use Nessus Home, so leave the first option selected. Now I go to the email sent by Nessus and copy the activation code and paste it into the related field. Then click Continue. As soon as setup is complete, Nessus downloads and initiates the latest plugins, which will be used in the scans by Nessus. First, it downloads the plugins according to your connection speed. Now, it may take a few minutes, so be patient. Now it's compiling the plugin. This step may take longer than the download step, so you might want to go and grab yourself a cup of coffee. And there it is. The initialization phase is complete. Welcome to the Nessus interface. So hang on, before rushing in to start our first Nessus scan, I'd like to show you how to create our own policies. Policies allow you to create custom templates defining what actions are performed during a scan. In the Nessus web interface, click Policies at the left side. You see that? Good. Click the Create a New Policy link inside the Policies page. Now here we have a lot of scanners. So in Advanced Scan, all the options are chosen by us without any guidance or recommendations. Basic Network Scan is generally suitable for any host. Internal PCI Network Scan is designed for internal scans, and it's based on PCI DSS standards. PCI DSS, Payment Card Institute, and Data Security Standards, simply one of the most important information security standards. So it looks like the days when this video was captured that Spectre and Meltdown are really new vulnerabilities. So here there is a scan specialized for Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities. This clearly shows how up-to-date Nessus is. Here there's another scanner specific for web applications. So let's configure our own scan. Click Advanced Scan. First, give a name for your policy. Now go to Discovery section. So we're in the Host Discovery page. Here we have a Ping the Remote Host option and the settings of the ping. If we're going to use the data we collected with Nmap, we can close this ping scan because we already have the lists of the hosts. Click Port Scanning to configure port scanning options. The default value of the port scan range is, well, default. That means Nessus will scan the ports, which is in its Nessus services file. Now I go to the terminal screen to analyze a Nessus services file. Let's find the file first. Use the find command to find the file. / means that the search will begin from the root directory. -name shows the name of the search file, and hit enter. And here it is. You can stop the search using Control-C keys. I use the less command to see the content of the file. Here are the ports, protocols, and the default services which use these ports. Now I want to see the number of the lines of Nessus services file to understand how many ports are scanned by default. Cat command with a file name, pipe, WC to see the word count. The first number is the number of lines, the second one is the number of the words, and the last one is the number of the characters. So we can say that 9,000 ports are scanned by default, which is the total of both TCP and UDP ports. But what if you want to see the number of TCP ports scanned by default? You can use grep before WC, type cat file name, pipe, grep, TCP, pipe, WC. You will see the number of TCP ports scanned by default. There are about 4,600 TCP ports. Now, if you want to scan for all ports, you should type 1 through 65535 in port scan range field. So here are the options to use SSH service for local port enumerators. So let's have a short break here. If you have some credentials to scan some services in depth, you can define those credentials before the scan. So here, select the Credentials tab, and you see some services. When you click the SSH, for example, you will see the credential options. But let's remove this for now. Now turn back to Settings by clicking its tab. We were in Discovery Port Scanning page, and here are the port scanning options. SYNSCAN is selected by default. If you like, you can select TCP and or UDP scans as well. Now go to the Advanced section. Safe checks are enabled by default. So we can select scan IP addresses in a random order to make the scan a little more stealthy. Let's look at the performance options. We can reduce the number of max simultaneous hosts per scan to avoid delays in network traffic. Max number of concurrent TCP sessions per host is not defined by default. We can define an upper bound to keep the hosts safe. And again, we may define a maximum number of concurrent TCP sessions per scan to keep the network traffic safe. Now, look at the tabs on the top of the new policy page, and you'll see the Plugins tab. Right, so here we have tons of plugins used in Nessus scans. If you click one of the plugin families, you'll see all the plugins of that family. You see the total number of plugins in a plugin family, and here are the plugins. You can click on Enabled next to a plugin to disable it. Or if you want to disable an entire plugin family entirely, for example, denial of service, click on Enable label next to the name of the plugin family. Click Save, and now we have our own scan policy. At last, we are ready to start a Nessus vulnerability scan. This is the main page of the Nessus web interface. We are in My Scan section of Scans tab. At the upper left corner, click New Scan. First, Nessus asks for the scanner. We have seen them before, so here we can choose the most suitable one for our scan. But in the home version of Nessus, unfortunately, some scans are disabled. If you click Internal PCI Network Scan, for example, the application redirects you to the Nessus website to buy Nessus Professional. There are also available scanners like Basic Network Scan, or alternatively, go to User Defined tab and select your own policy. This is the policy we defined in the previous lecture, so I chose this. Now, give a name to your scan. As you can see in the right side of the name field, the required fields are identified by Nessus. So write a description if you want. Select the folder for the outputs, and define the targets. You can list the hosts in Targets field one by one. I want to scan my two systems now. 99.139 is OWASP BWA, and 99.206 is my Metasploitable system. So if you want multiple IP addresses, just put a comma in between them. You can also define an IP block or a range, just as you remember in the Nmap lectures. Or alternatively, if you have a file that contains a list of the hosts that we also covered earlier, you can add that file using the Add File link in the Upload Targets field. So now we're ready to launch the scan. At the bottom of the page, select Save, or click the down arrow button and select Launch to start the scan immediately. I choose Launch. It first saved the scan and then launched immediately. So while it's scanning, let's see some of the parts of Nessus interface. At the left, you see the folders. Next to My Scans folder, it says that I have one active scan. And in My Scans page, you see the scan that we just started. If you click on it, you see the scan details. There are three tabs here: Hosts, Vulnerabilities, and History. When you click on the Vulnerabilities tab, you see the vulnerabilities found during the scan. Here, we already have some results. Now click the Hosts tab to turn back. These are the systems that we defined as targets: OWASP, BWA, and Metasploitable. At the right, you see the severity levels of the vulnerabilities. Nessus classifies vulnerabilities into 5 levels. Informational level quickly identifies non-vulnerability information, which is, well, nice to know, and separates them from the vulnerability detail, which is need to know, right? Low level identifies flaws that might help an attacker to better refine his attack, but by itself that flaw won't be sufficient for a compromise. Medium level identifies that some information is leaking from the remote host. An attacker might be able to read a file he should not have access to. High level identifies that the attacker can read arbitrary files on the remote host and or can execute commands on it. And critical level vulnerabilities are the most important vulnerabilities for us. These vulnerabilities can be exploited by a tool, and in most cases, the attacker does not need to make an extra effort to exploit them. So let's fast forward the scan. Now, on the right side of each host row, you can see the status of the scan of that host. 100% means the scan of that host is complete. Did you know you can ping the hosts sometimes to understand that they're still alive? And finally, our scan is completed in 4 minutes, which is a very fast scan for a vulnerability scan. Now let's click the Metasploitable to go to the vulnerabilities of that host. Here are the vulnerabilities of the Metasploitable machine found by this scan. Please note that there might be other vulnerabilities that cannot be found by Nessus with the policy that we used. The vulnerabilities are ordered by severity levels by default, and I think that's a good idea. The vulnerabilities in the critical severity level are the most important ones for us again. So click on a vulnerability to see the details of it. So here we have the name of the vulnerability, a brief description, a solution method, and the links to learn more about it, and last, the host and the port where the vulnerability lives. At the right side of the screen, you see some additional and important information about the vulnerability. So for this particular vulnerability, Nessus says that we can exploit it using Core Impact, which is a commercial and very powerful exploitation tool. And here are the scores of this vulnerability. 10.0 is perfect for us. So click Back to Vulnerabilities to go back to the list of the vulnerabilities. Here there is another vulnerability which says the VNC server is running on the host and its password is password. If that's true, and if there's no additional measure to protect the host, we can access that host very easily. I'll show you. Let's test it. Go to the terminal screen and run the VNC viewer by typing xvnc viewer and hit enter. If you don't have VNC viewer installed on your Kali, type apt-get install xvnc viewer and hit enter. Type the IP address of Metasploitable as the VNC server and hit enter. And now type password as the password and hit enter again. And voila, we are in the system. I use the womi Linux command to learn the user that I've caught, and uname-a to learn the operating system and the kernel details. Ifconfig to see the information about the network interfaces, etc. Now type rm-rf/. No, just kidding, don't do that, don't. Let's perform another vulnerability scan. I want to perform an aggressive scan to find as many vulnerabilities as possible. Go to Kali and start the Nessus daemon if it's not already started. Use service Nessus D status to learn if it's running. Okay, so it's inactive. So I use service Nessus D start to start Nessus service. Now, go to your browser and connect to the Nessus interface. It is a HTTPS service. It's running on the same machine, so I'll use 127.0.0.1 loopback IP address referred to as localhost, and the port of the Nessus service is 8834. Sign in using your credential. Click the New Scan button. Now let's choose Advanced Scan for this scan. Will be more aggressive than a basic network scan. So enter the basic info, give the scan a name, and enter a description if you want. And the targets. Here I have a Windows XP with an IP address of 207 and Metasploitable 2 Linux system with an IP address of 206. Here I have a third system, an up-to-date Windows 8, and its IP address is 223. Right, so back to Kali and enter the IP addresses of the target systems. 206 for Metasploitable, 207 for Windows XP, and 223 for Windows 8. Now click Discovery in the list at the left. So we're simply going to accept the defaults on this page. So let's click on Assessment over to the left. And on this page, we want to check Perform Thorough Tests, so check the box. Then move to the Report section in the options on the left. You can override the normal verbosity to make it report as much info as possible. So next, click the Advanced option in the list to the left. The only thing we're going to do here is uncheck Enable Safe Checks. Now, on a normal production network, you would leave this box checked. You don't want to take down production systems when scanning. But for our purposes here, we want to gather as much information as possible, so we're going to uncheck it. Now click on the Credentials tab. Select the SSH option in the list on the left. Now, since we know the username and password for the Metasploitable 2 machine, we're going to put those credentials in here. Remember, the username and password are both MSF admin. Change the authentication method to password and put in the username and password below. Now, in the Plugins tab, we only need to activate the plugins that have to do with what might be running on a Linux system, so we can disable a few things here. Okay, I paused the demo here. I've got to make an apology. It's a late update. While capturing the demo, I forgot that I have Windows targets and disabled the Windows plugins. It's a mistake, and I just wanted to show you that what we do here is, if there's a problem, there's always a solution. So if you have Windows targets, please do not disable the Windows plugins. All right, let's move on. We can finally click Save at the bottom. So here's the scan, and we're ready to run it. Simply click the great triangle at the far right of our scan, which stands for launching the scan. And yes, the scan is started. Now you can pause or stop the scan anytime you want. So click the scan, and we see the results in real time. Okay, boy, that's going to take a while to run, so it's probably a good time to check your email, grab a cup of coffee maybe, but just make sure you come back to review the results. So the scan is completed in 17 minutes. Now another pause here. Because I disabled the Windows plugins, it seems as if the Windows systems don't have critical vulnerabilities. It's not right, especially my Windows XP has several critical vulnerabilities. If you didn't disable Windows plugins, you're supposed to see some more vulnerabilities for Windows systems. Now, to see the results of the Metasploitable scan in detail, let's click the Metasploitable Results 206. The Nessus Home found 10 critical vulnerabilities with our scan configuration. But please note that the configuration affects the results, so the target systems may have more vulnerabilities than reported. If there is a vulnerability and it's not found in a scan, we call it a false negative. Now, I'm sure you know that the critical vulnerabilities are the most dangerous ones, But that's where it gets good. They are the most exploitable ones in general. So let's click on one of these critical vulnerabilities, for example, bind shell backdoor detection. Well, look at the description. It says a shell is listening on the port without any authentication being required. This is obviously a backdoor. Here's a port number, 1524. Now, let's check if the finding is a true positive. Go to terminal screen. I use Netcat tool to connect. Simply type NC and the target IP and the target port 1524. And we're in. We have the shell for Metasploitable. Type who am I to learn the credential we have. We are the root user. Now, it was too simple. It's just not fun. And, I don't like it. I like a good challenge, right? I mean, we are the root user, and we can access anything we want. For example, shadow file, which contains the hashes of the user's passwords. Okay, back to the browser and click on the Back to Vulnerabilities link to turn back to the vulnerabilities of Metasploitable. Now I'd like to show you some more. Scroll on down the vulnerabilities. It shows 50 vulnerabilities per page by default, but let's make it 200 to see all the findings in a single page. Now the findings are ordered by severity levels, so information is at the bottom. Findings with a severity level of information identify non-vulnerability information, which is, nice to know, and it keeps it separate from the vulnerability detail. So here there's an info RMI registry detection. Let's click it. It says that the remote host is running an RMI registry, retrieving remote objects in the Java runtime method invocation system. So let's look for the exploits of the Metasploit framework, if there is any exploit for Java RMI. Open a terminal screen and run MSF console. So here we have MSF console. Let's search the exploits of RMI. Too many results. To keep it more specific, I want to search Java RMI. So we have 2 auxiliaries and 2 exploits at this time. So look at the exploit in the last line. This module takes advantage of the default configuration of the RMI registry and RMI activation services, which allow loading classes from any remote URL. Let's try to use it on our RMI port. Please don't worry, I am going to explain what these all mean. I just want to show you an example at the beginning, so bear with me. Type use at the module name with the full path. You can simply select the module name and click the middle button of the mouse to copy and paste it. Type show payloads to see the payloads can be used with this module. So I want to use this payload to have a meterpreter session. Again, don't worry, I'll explain what the meterpreter is soon, but just copy and paste the payload name. Type show options to see the parameters of the exploit and the payload as well. Set the remote host as Metasploitable 206. Default remote port is the same with our port, 1099. Serve host is the local host to listen on. Set this to be our Kali 222. Let the default serve port remain. So the other options are not required. I'll just leave them blank. Now are the payload options. Set the listen host to be our Kali 222. Default listen port is good, 4444. And finally type exploit to run the exploit. So there, it looks like we have a Meterpreter session. Type sessions-L to list the active sessions. Be patient, we'll see them in detail. Type session-I, session ID, to interact with the session. And here we are, we're in. Now I'm going to show you what we can do with a Meterpreter session in the following chapter. But here's a couple of Meterpreter commands. sysinfo to see the system information. Hashdump to gather password hashes. Now, no such command for this system. Thankfully, we have an alternative for this. Type runpost/linux/gather/hashdump and hit enter. And collect the fruits of your labor. So, as you see here, we found another way to exploit the system, even though the finding was just information. So, I hope you understand not to underestimate any finding. Okay, everybody, I admitted I made a mistake in a previous scan, and I disabled the Windows plugins, although 2 of my 3 targets are Windows. It's just a really big mistake that affects the results, so that clearly shows that we should be very careful while configuring the tools, such as the vulnerability scanner. Now, I scanned the target machines once again, and I didn't disable the Windows plugins this time. So these are the results. 207 is Windows XP, and 223 is Windows 8. I click on the Windows XP to see the vulnerabilities. And as you see, there are a lot of critical vulnerabilities. I'll click on one of them just to see its details. So here is the name and the description about the vulnerability. And scrolling down, yes, it says the vulnerability is exploitable with Metasploit. Let's go back to vulnerabilities. I want to show you another vulnerability for our XP system. This is the vulnerability MS08-067, which has a very stable exploit. Rolling down a bit, and Nessus says we can exploit this vulnerability using Metasploit. So let's do it. I think it's an invitation. Open a terminal screen and start MSF console. Search for the vulnerability MS08-067. Here's the exploit. Let's use it. Look for the available payloads using Show Payloads. I want to use shell payload with bind TCP stager for this time. Show options. Set the remote host that was, well, let me look at the Nessus page again. Yes, 2007. And the port is 445. The default value is correct. Show the options again, and we're ready to run the exploit. Here is the shell of the target system. Exploitation is successful once again. And finally, let's see the reporting abilities of Nessus. Open a browser and go to Nessus service. HTTPS, localhost, and port 8834. Log in with your credential. And here are the scans we performed before. I've only one for now, but click on it and see the details. In the upper right-hand corner, there's an export combo box. When you click on it, you see the report types of Nessus Home. So let's generate a PDF report first. We have 2 options in the Home Edition, and you'll have other options if you buy the Professional Edition. So I choose Custom here, and as you see, we have only 2 options in Home Edition. You can group the vulnerabilities by host or plugin. I choose the host. And click Export to generate the report in PDF format. Save it or open it now. I'll choose Open, and that way you can see it. So the file is downloaded into the temp folder. And here's a scan report in PDF format. Vulnerabilities are grouped by hosts. I'll click the Metasploitable header. Now there's a few lines of brief summary, then the explanation of the vulnerabilities start. As you see, the vulnerabilities are not sorted by the severity level, which is not good. Of course, you can sort them in the Professional Edition. That's where they get you. So now let's see the Vulnerability Assessment Report in HTML format. Same home page with the PDF option. This time I'll choose the Executive Summary option and click Export. Open it with Firefox. And here's the report in HTML format. A single frame for each host. Click the Show Details button to see the vulnerabilities list of the host. If you want to have detailed information about a vulnerability, click on it. The HTML file redirects you to the online web pages of Tenable Security.